Hello again, guys. Ooh, the camera's not here. Let's get shiny. But anyway, that's enough of my shiny head. Let's get out of it. There we go. I can't see it now. What I was saying, guys, is yesterday I finished the sketch that I'm comfortable with, and I want to start inking the picture I did yesterday. And yesterday was the 5th. And we did V for we did V from V. Shut up! Right, start again. Hello and welcome. Like I said, yesterday we did V for Vendetta, as it was the 5th of November, and on the 5th of November we celebrate Guy Fawkes, and we did very much too. That's start again, guys. And again, I do apologise I wasn't live last night, but I did set up a fireworks display for my son and me, and afterwards I was absolutely shattered. So I spent some time over on Mixer, not playing a game, just sort of chilling out with other people that I chill out with on Mixer. And if you caught any of that, thank you very much for doing that. But everything that I do play, that I do bring over to from Mixer to the YouTube channel, which I did upload. And if you put me in the corner, you can check out what I've been playing the past couple of days. And I probably will be there again tonight because I do enjoy playing that game. And it's because it's got fireworks in it and you get to explode a whole lot of stuff. I think we probably do it sort of playing that again tonight, guys. So don't forget, if you want to join me, come over to Mixer tonight. But if you can't join me because you can't find the app or you for some reason you can't download it, don't worry. You can get it on your phone. You can get it through your Xbox, which is prominently where it actually lives. But that's enough of that. That's the gaming side. Today, as it's daytime, we're going to be doing some art. And again, we did this yesterday, which is the V from Vendetta. Again, I think it's coming backwards, but I checked the streams yesterday, and I don't think it actually comes backwards. It's just whereas I record it. So yeah, we did the Houses of Parliament, and we did obviously the not Houses of Parliament, Big Ben. And we did, this is Housings of Parliament. And we did V for Vendetta, the character from the graphic novel and from the film. But today we'll be continuing on from where we left off yesterday on the piece of art, I should say, and also on the actual graphic novel being read to us by the author of the novel itself. So if you didn't check out the first half of V for Vendetta, the graphic novel and the artwork, don't forget to, again, put me in the corner, right about here, maybe over here, don't know where you put me, but put me in the corner and scroll down so you can see that one there and check it out so you guys can enjoy that one. But again, as always, guys, we will be listening to the rest of that one, and I will be continuing on with the artwork here. So let's get the artwork and let's put it on the table and flip round the thing. Again, I'm going to get that playlist going and we'll listen to that as I draw. And again, guys, if you have any ideas for this month or next month, as next month is going to be December. December is obviously getting closer and closer to the other day of St. Nicholas coming down the chimney. And I will be doing something sort of very Christmassy throughout the month of next month. And I'm not trying to be like the shops and making everything really early. Just giving you a heads up what I'll be doing, as this is the beginning of November. November is all to do with fire and fireworks. Hence why I've done V for Vendetta. And the House of the Parliament, obviously the 5th was yesterday. Today's the 6th. And I thought it only needs doing to continue on with this one. As everything I do ink. I'm just sort of faffing with the camera a moment, guys. Bear with me. Focusing everything. Nope, that's gone too far. I do apologize that you can't see everything as you should, but everything. Just going to get that. That's as good as that camera is going to get. But you can see the full picture over on Instagram, guys, because I will post the paper version. And again, as always, once I've inked this, I will be taking taking another picture of it and going over to my free app called Critter and digitizing. So, without further ado, let's get that playlist going. Continue on where we left off from the story. Again, if you want to hear the beginning of the story, go and check out yesterday's artwork and listen to that one. But otherwise, guys, let's continue on and continue on.
To the booth, camera crew still tagging along behind. Jones, get anyone not wearing a mask out of here? Then, glancing back at the wounded, possibly dying executive who'd been cut down in the first volley.
We're actually quite a bit into the story now, so I'm going to let that play in the background. And if you need any explanations as I'm going through, guys, you can leave a comment down below in the live chat section. Or if you're watching back, leave a comment down below. As always, guys, my name is Blut084, BLUT084 Art and Games. I did say in the last stream that I was going to go and get some new pens, but it's absolutely persistently piddling it down outside, and I don't want to go and get wet just for pens. So I'm going to be using that normal pen I normally use, which is my favourite black inking pen. Maybe using a little bit of Sharpie. It all depends on if that'll work. But I will be using Copic markers as always. These are on and out, so I do really need to get some more. But if any of these pens don't work, I will be using pencil. I think I might use pencil for the background, as this, again, this all to do with this month is fire and fireworks. So I'm going to be sort of using different techniques to create fireworks and the stonework and things like that, if I need to.
By the time
Which
Finch arrived
I
at the
do.
booth, shouldering aside the camera crew, they protested, of course. This was great television, and what could be more important than that? Dascombe was down on his knees before the bomb, almost as if in prayer. But it wasn't a rosary or a prayer book he had clutched in his hands. It was a pair of wire cutters. "Dascombe!" yelled Finch sharply. But before he could say anything else, Dascombe had turned to face him, and something about his face now stopped the words on his lips. For Roger Dascombe was a man transfigured, a man who, forced to the greatest decision he'd ever had to make.
Just faffing again, guys, up on Instagram. Letting everybody know that I'm live. Again, my name is Blut084, live here every day, occasionally on Mixer, and every day over on Instagram.
Quite plainly, his life was the studio. There was no question to answer. Anything else to be decided could be rendered up to God and the almost sanctified pair of wire cutters he held in his hand. "Do you have any idea how long it would take to rebuild this facility?" Dascombe asked, with a near supernal calm and a strange luminescence in his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Finch grated harshly, hoping that some word would shake Dascombe out of this state that, to an honest copper like him, looked close to madness.
Slurping me coffee.
"Pray that I do," Dascombe smiled, turning back to the device. And Finch, knowing that any race to get a disposal unit here in time would be won hands down by the bomb, began to pray very earnestly indeed. Outside the studio, Jones had managed to shepherd the unmasked studio executives past the two policemen left guarding the torch-down door, and so, he hoped, to safety. He was about to go back in and get himself a piece of whatever action was left, when he heard another shout from the still befogged studio. "Wait!" came the cry. "Don't shoot!"
I'm just going to pull up my images I had from yesterday
The more masked men,
and
like all the others wearing capes, came rushing
get the
through
colouring,
door.
but I'm
Jones
basically
jumped
just
back,
going to be inking today.
uncertain which of the two to train his gun upon, hoping desperately that the other
Again, I'll be
two
using
guns
my
would tell the one
inking
he
pens.
didn't.
Fine line,
He thought,
which is a
"This wasn't a situation for all bloody infantry like them to
needle
sort out."
fine line, but it's not as fine as I want it to be sometimes, but beggars
Seeming
can't
to
be
shove each
choosers.
other aside in their haste to escape, the two masked men lurched into the hall, the first suddenly pushed somehow by the second, and desperately trying to retain his footing, barging into the three cops and scattering them. By the time they'd regained their wits, the second man had stumbled awkwardly, his hands still fixed behind his back, and gone sprawling on the floor. He began to yell words that, just then, were the last things that Jones wanted to hear. "Shoot!" he shrieked, looking up toward his standing companion. "Dear God, it's him! Shoot!" The upright man hurriedly spun round, though strangely did nothing more than that, to face the three policemen who had by now regained their composure sufficiently to ensure that all three pistols were pointing dead straight in his direction. But that was about as far as their composure went. The wonder was that none of those three pistols had yet gone off. "On your knees!" screamed Jones, the note of rising panic obvious in his voice. "Get down on your knees!" And to his enormous relief, the man actually did. Slowly, awkwardly, silently. No one moved. Someone had to. Blowing out a breath
Okay,
and then
right.
sucking in an even
Got the
larger
images
one,
there ready.
Jones raised
So now
his
you
hand,
remove the
gesturing
mouse.
to stay back and tell him.
We don't need that one anymore.
Then, holding his gun before him, almost as if it were a
Ink
crucifix
pen.
in which to fend off a vampire, he took a slow pace
I
forward.
think I'll use this one to begin with.
Another, yet more slow. Then, tentatively,
Get
nervously,
you in a. It is a bit more difficult for me to put this camera in a nice position for you, as I normally have the book on its side like this, and you're sort of on the other side. But as I'm doing a spread scene instead of
his mouth
lengthways, I don't know. That's
and
length
before any of them
and
had time to react,
so width. Yeah, we're doing a width. I don't know.
had risen from the floor.
I'm not a professional artist. I'll never ever claim to be
All
one.
pretense now thrown aside. The real V, his hands not bound in any way behind him, but rather holding long knives. So sharp, those blades, and such a silvery glint along their edges, it was almost beautiful to see. Until they suddenly crimsoned for a moment, and after that were never seen again. It was over in an instant. Jones never got off a shot, being closest as he was, though his companions did, but all their bullets found was a billowing cloak swirled out around their target, confusing their aim like a bullfighter's cape. No red rag this, but simply formless shadow. And then there was no time for further shooting. There was only time for screaming, and the noise of cracking bone, and the wicked hissing sound of sharp knives sinking into...
Do hope you enjoy the playlist in the background, guys, because it is one of my favourite films and actual graphic novels.
Spreading pools of thick, coagulating gore. For
And again, you will be offended by certain parts of this, but that is the actual aim and cause of the graphic novel.
Brow back in the studio control booth, as he watched Roger Ascombe, still somehow bathed in that glow of serenity that Finch himself was desperately wishing for, almost certainly about to bring their lives to a shattered, shredded end. And if he didn't, the clock, now rapidly nearing 0, quite definitely would. The clock and the bomb attached. How did it feel to be blown to bits? Finch didn't really know, but was rather afraid he'd soon find out. And it wasn't much comfort to think he wouldn't be alone in the discovery, or that it would almost certainly be quick. 2 or 3 minutes had passed while Finch had assumed that Dascombe was examining the bomb. But then he realized he was doing nothing of the sort. He was simply using the last moments of his life for some sort of demented contemplation, until there was no time left for anything else but decisive action. And now that time had finally arrived. "Here we go," said Dascombe coolly, and clicked a wire.
Again, as always, guys, when I ink, I just go over what I've already drawn. Sometimes I change things, sometimes I don't.
He blew out a nervous breath and raised a thankful glance toward heaven, then realized that no one else had made a move or said a word. Looking back toward Dascombe, he saw the man still down there on his knees, his eyes still fixed religiously on the clock. The clock that still continued to tick down the last few seconds with a horrid, glacial slowness. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Nothing. No explosion, no screams, no noise, no pain, no death. And then the tension broke, restoring Roger Dascombe to almost human form. "I did it!" he exclaimed, face alight with quite another excitement now. "I did it!" "Damn," muttered Finch, there seeming nothing else to say. And leaving Dascombe to his triumph, he turned away and began to push his way through the crowd at the door, some laughing, some looking nauseous, some just slumping to the ground, depending on how the stress and its relieving took them. He was sure he'd never liked Dascombe, but he had to admit that when it came to the things he sincerely thought were important, the man certainly had balls. Not much sense, perhaps, but balls. And because of Dascombe's demented foolhardiness, they'd managed to put a stop to one of their foe's relentless attacks. "And now I've got to catch him," he added, to no one in particular. Not far away, Evie Hammond was hurrying along the corridor toward the elevators, hoping desperately that now the fire alarms had been switched off, they would have been restored to full function as well. But not far from Fred Thorpe's still vacant security station, she suddenly glanced up. And there, coming from the direction of the studio in silent haste, was V. All her guts knotting up at the sight of him, Evie ducked into a doorway and simply hid. Ridiculous as those old stories were about ostriches hiding their heads in the sand, now she could see the logic behind them after all. If it wasn't the police, it was V, and she just wanted all of them to go away. Wanted to get home and hide her head under the bed covers, then to wake up tomorrow morning and find that everything was once again the way it had been yesterday. And for today and last night to have simply never happened. Yes, there was something enormously attractive about V, despite that she had no idea of his looks. A sense of wildness and freedom, and the potential to be so much more than any normal person ever would, but at the same time that wildness and that freedom were terrifying. And the violence only made it worse, especially to one who feared the world as much as she did. So hide, then. Wait until he'd gone, and then try to slip away before he or anyone else noticed. But to know when he'd gone required risking a glance round the corner before she dared to make a move. No, not yet. She'd guessed the timing wrong, and he had only just arrived at the elevators, reaching out to press the button and summon up a car. But when his finger was a mere inch away... "Freeze!" Dominic Stone's voice rang out first, and then the young policeman himself appeared, emerging from his hiding place behind the security desk. His gun was firmly held in a two-handed grip, and it was pointing with absolutely unerring aim directly between the masked man's eyes. And there was something in his handsome bravery that she had to admire, or would have done anyway under any other circumstances. Right now, though, he was the last person she wanted to see. "Get your hands on your head!" he shouted harshly, tension edging a voice he was, with some small success, struggling to control. "Do it now, or I shoot!" As if her previous terror weren't enough, by now Evie was thrown into a complete panic. A few seconds ago, the course of action had seemed obvious. Just wait a little longer for the situation to clear, then escape. But what on earth was she going to do now? If V was arrested, and the rest of the police came back here to this landing, she'd never get an elevator. Probably never reach the stairwell either. Whether they got V or not, they'd still be after her as well. And besides, if V was arrested now, things would never change. No wildness, no freedom, no potential. Just eternal Adam Sutler and Fingermen and terror. And which of those alternatives was actually the more terrifying? "I must say," V declared, a few paces away and with his hands now firmly placed behind his head, "that I'm rather astonished by the response time of London's finest. I hadn't expected you to be so Johnny on the spot." "We were here before you even got started," Dominic told him, eyes and aim never wavering from the target, concentration never lapsing for an instant. No point in telling him they come here looking for someone else entirely, and that him being here had just been a fortunate coincidence. "Bad luck, chummy." "Oh, I don't know about that," V told him calmly, not moving a muscle, but looking past the young policeman and farther down the corridor. Still, the gun didn't waver, nor the concentration. Even so, Dominic couldn't prevent the images that were rising up unbidden in his mind. The man who caught the terrorist. His picture in the papers, the television interviews, celebrity, promotion, maybe even the police medal, though that didn't mean as much these days as it used to. When the hand tapped him lightly, almost tentatively, on the shoulder, Dominic jumped so much it was a miracle his jerking finger didn't pull the trigger. But that much he did manage to achieve. Looking round, though, was something he couldn't prevent. And there was Evie right behind him, and looking absolutely terrified at what she was doing, the pepper spray held up a little more than 6 inches from his face, right before his widening eyes. And then she pressed the button. Screaming, blinded, retching in pain and shock, he reached out instinctively and managed to grab her wrist,
Bear with me, guys.
twisting the spray away before she could do
I've got to get myself
making her yelp with the bone-crushing
a ruler or something, because I've got inking now, so I can't remove any of it. I need to get a ruler or something that will give me a straight line.
Cold metal cracked against Eva's temple, and her legs buckled, sending her collapsing to the floor just as V moved forward and dragged Dominic away from her. No time for steel now. Just instant, unarmed retribution. A straight-fingered knife hand jabbed viciously into the policeman's solar plexus, taking his wind and doubling him over in exactly the right position for a hammer-like elbow straight down on the base of his skull. Dominic was unconscious before his head hit the floor. And then, for the first time in a long, long while, V stood there over the prone pair of bodies, staring down at Evie, and quite uncertain what to do next. Not long afterward, television screens across the land blinked into life once more, reappearing with a somber and obviously hurriedly constructed caption, "Special Emergency Report." And in those same retirement homes, pubs and clubs, and middle-class family homes that only a short while ago had hosted V's interruption to the schedule for an audience both puzzled and enthralled, expectant viewers held their breath and wondered what they'd be getting next. What they got was Dick, this time without June, without the viewer-friendly sofa, and definitely without the reassuring "all's well with the world" smile, but with a banner logo in the corner of the screen saying, "Crisis at Jordan Tower." "We are interrupting your regularly scheduled program," he began, as if the program hadn't already been interrupted, "to bring you this terrifying report of a terrorist takeover of Jordan Tower, which ended only moments ago." All this was said with a grim and dour expression to match his tone of voice. Then a pause, just to make sure everyone had got the point. The takeover had ended. There was no longer any crisis. Normal order was rapidly being restored. Professional as ever, Jodascom himself, who now believed that there was nothing beyond his power to do. A psychotic male terrorist, identified only by the code letter V, attacked the studios and control booth with high-powered explosives and other weapons, used against innocent, unarmed civilians in order to broadcast a message of hate. We have just received this footage of a daring police raid. At this point, the screen began to display an edited extract from the handheld, grainy video footage that Dascom's crew had shot on entering the studio behind the police. Cinema Verite, it looked, with its swirling fog and cacophonous volley of gunfire, its twisting, bleeding body and its screams. And cinema verite it was, except that the cry of "don't shoot" had been edited out. And no one mentioned how many men in masks had been found in the studio, or that this one, now on life support in the nearby hospital but fading fast, was not, in fact, the right one. And no one would know about that, of course. The main thing was to show the audience the gunshots and the blood and the obvious evidence that the terrorist was dead. Threat over. See how efficient the police and security services were. Feel safe. And more to the point, heed the warning, don't try it, Buster. You too could end up like dead meat in the butcher's shop, the same as the masked poltroon who'd been talking all that crap a few minutes before, and getting shot dead like that. He was lucky. "This is only an initial report," Dick's voiceover continued, until the camera returned to him and his now much more reassuring smile. "But at this time it is believed that during this heroic raid the terrorist was shot and killed." And then, with just a hint of triumph and much more emphasis, as if the louder it was said, the much more obviously it would be true, "Again, From what we have been told by the authorities, the danger is now over, and the terrorist is dead. And somewhere on a hill in southeast London, a little girl who could have been Evie a dozen years before, and whose parents were already suspected of being dangerously free thinkers, said precisely what she thought, and what her parents thought, and half the population of the city, too. Bollocks. 6. Evie woke in darkness, a dull, throbbing pain in the side of her head that felt as if someone were thumping it insistently and sadistically with a rubber mallet, only to realize a little later that the throbbing was actually caused by the pumping of arterial blood through the bruised and sensitive skin where she'd been hit by the policeman's automatic. She'd always known there was a pulse there, but this was more like the crack of doom, a doom that just kept repeating itself over and over, forever and ever. Reaching up to touch it, she found a cool, damp compress over the welt and wondered who on earth could have put it there. With that memory of how she'd been rendered unconscious and all that had happened before it came first horror, and then the realization that she was lying in a bed, still fully dressed. But not her own bed, not in her own apartment. A weak ray of light was leaking into the windowless room from a door that stood slightly ajar. A warm, candle-like glow that spilled across the bed, and as her eyes adjusted, allowed her to take in just a little of her surroundings. The room seemed to have no walls, or rather, every inch of wall was hidden by bookshelves, all of them stacked horizontally so that even more volumes could be crammed into the available space, book upon book, rising up with the density of bricks so that it almost seemed that they and nothing else were supporting the low and vaulted ceiling that loomed above the bed like a stone canopy. More books than she'd ever seen outside of a library. And quite apart from the shelves, there were more stacks of books rising from the floor, occasionally falling back to spill in untidied chaos like breaking waves in a vast sea of literature. And near at hand, that soft light from the door picked out a few gold-decorated spines and gave their authors' names a hallowed glow. Oscar Wilde, Radcliffe Hall, William Beckford. Banned authors, every one, or so she had to think. Some of the names, such as Pierre, she'd never even heard of before. Beside the light, there came soft music from beyond the door. For a moment, she wasn't sure what it was, but then she remembered it from long, long ago. The sort of music she'd last heard when she was just a little girl, the kind her father liked. Blues, black American music, banned like the books around her. And then she almost choked on a memory rising up out of the past and threatening to strangle her with its sweet, cloying loveliness of lying in bed on a Sunday morning with Teddy in her arms, warm and safe and 5 years old, entranced by the dust motes floating in a beam of golden sunshine, recovering from a childhood illness, and smelling Mummy's roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, and Daddy's pipe smoke rising from the downstairs living room as that same song was played on an ancient hi-fi, and how Daddy always mowed the lawn on Sunday mornings, and how there was wisteria growing against the garden wall, and there was always sunshine. And then she knew she was going to have to get up and find out what this was all about, before she burst into salty, melancholic tears. Beyond the door was a short passage that somehow reminded her of a wine cellar, leading to a larger room, more startling and more wonderful even than the bedroom book-room in which she'd awoken, but windowless just the same. Like some sort of storeroom from a museum or art gallery, or both combined, the place was packed with artworks from the Renaissance to the modern, from art for art's sake to the commercial, from Titian to the comic book cover. Comic books themselves as well, abused as they were, though mostly of the underground, political or artistic varieties that never quite received the treatment they deserved. Still more books too, with fictions from the Iliad to Raymond Chandler, philosophies from Plato to Foucault, works of the now eradicated neo-pagan religions, and histories by the hundreds containing tales that it seemed no one ever paid any attention to anymore. More than this, there was all that could be saved of the popular culture, swept away by Sattler's fascist imperialism. The DVDs and videos, CDs, cassettes, and even old vinyl.
Sorry guys, there's somebody giving me a message on Instagram. If you would like to leave a message to me, please leave them on the live cast itself. I will answer any comments
Papering the wall behind all these foreground
if you leave them live, and also I will answer any comments later on Instagram.
Old gangsters never die. But it seemed they'd been asleep for longer than she could remember. And in a corner, gleaming bright
for that, I
with
think.
chrome and plastic and electric lights, a 1950s jukebox, from which that same old blues came gently crooning forth. And Evie could only stand there like Alice in Wonderland, choking at full portions of delight. So many things she thought were lost, so many things preserved. From out of the shadows, V silently emerged, capeless now, but still masked and wigged, still dressed in the same Jacobean tunic, breeches and boots. "Oh!" yelped Evie, startled. "You scared me." "My apologies," he said gently, a genuine concern quite obvious in his voice. "Are you feeling all right?" "Yes, thank you," she told him warily, a little reassured by his tone, but still uncertain about so many things, including his intentions. "What is this place?" "My home," he replied. And artificial as it obviously was, there seemed to be something genuine about the smile upon the mask. Or perhaps the smile was in his voice. "I call it the Shadow Gallery." "It's beautiful." Evie turned to let her eye run over the assembled treasures once again, always spotting new things she hadn't seen before. Was that really an Egyptian mummy case over there in the shadows? Or just some movie backlot prop? And those strange wooden carvings, like the ones she used to see in the Africa shop before Sattler's thugs had burned the place down. Japanese woodblock prints. Buddha. It just seemed endless. "Where did you get all this stuff?" "Here and there," he said lightly as the blues tune came to an end, idly starting to wander round the room and taking in the display with a single all-encompassing wave of the hand. "Much of it comes from the vaults of the Ministry of Objectionable Materials." "You stole them?" Evie asked, wide-eyed, suddenly afraid once more. Was there nothing this man wouldn't dare? Theft, violence, terrorism? And here she was with him, in his headquarters, consorting with an enemy of the state. What would they do to her if ever anyone found out? Heavens, no. A gentle laugh added unexpected warmth to his voice. "Stealing implies ownership. You cannot steal from a censor. I merely reclaimed them." "God, if they ever find this place," Evie began, but didn't quite complete the thought. "I suspect that if they do find this place," V told her, making light of the thought, "a few bits of art will be the least of my worries." "You mean after what you've done?" replied Evie. And then all the events of the previous day came flooding back, and the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Oh, God! Suddenly, all the wonderland around her didn't look anywhere near so wonderful at all, and her head, forgotten for a while in overwhelming novelty, began to throb once more. "What have I done?" she asked, mainly to herself, a hand raised to massage her forehead, as if that would somehow make her brain work the better. "I maced the detective," a groan of despair. "Oh, no. Why did I do that?" "You did what you thought was right," V told her, in an almost fatherly, reassuring tone. "No," said Evie, shaking her head in rejection. "I shouldn't have done it. I must have been out of my mind." "Is that what you really think?" he asked. And now somehow he reminded her of one of her old school teachers. "Or is that what they would want you to think?" Actually, though, now that she thought about it, she remembered that particular school teacher, intriguing though he might have been, was one of the ones she couldn't really bring herself to like. The one with a harsh, uncompromising view of the world, who saw everything in black and white and had no time for comfortable moral shades of grey, who had principles, the one who made her think too much, the agitator who would undoubtedly have been among the first to have had his head put in a black plastic bag. Not the bags the finger used as blindfolds when they took you away, though God knew she was terrified enough of those. The sort of bag they put a bullet through, that prevented the brains splattering everywhere. And then she couldn't help but feel, deep down in her bones, that the man standing before her, his true face hidden by the smiling mask, was exceptionally dangerous. Not just to the police, the state, or the world at large, but to her, personally as well. "I think I should go," she said abruptly, trying to suppress a sudden feeling of panic, looking round hopefully for an exit door. "May I ask where?" he said in a calming and oh so reasonable voice. "Home," she told him, unable to think of anything else but all the safety and comfort that it represented, tawdry as it was. Strange how she'd been wanting to get out of the Paddington area for ages, to move to somewhere better. Now she couldn't wait to get back there. "I have to go home." "You know they're looking for you," he said slowly, patiently, as if he were having to explain things to a small child. "If they know where you work, they certainly know where you live." "I have friends," said Evie desperately. "I could stay with them." "I'm afraid that won't work either." She'd known he was going to say that, even as she mentioned the idea. Knew as well that he was right. She couldn't drag her friends into this by asking for help. Or rather, she couldn't drag them in any more. Undoubtedly, they would already have been pulled in for questioning, and not at all of a pleasant sort. And these days, innocence was no excuse, no protection. "I want you to understand, Evie," V continued, turning away from her now as if the words he had to speak were rather too hard to say directly to her face. "I didn't want this for either of us, but I couldn't see any other way. You were unconscious and I had to make a decision. If I'd left you, right now you'd be in one of Creedy's interrogation cells. They'd imprison you, torture you, and in all probability kill you in pursuit of finding me." Evie knew that every word he said was true, but still they sounded like a death sentence. And in many ways they were, for whatever happened now.
Okay, alright, that's me inking.
Irrevocably and forever.
So nearly there now. Like I said, guys, all I'm doing is going over things with the ink pen and sort of sharpening up the lines, making everything that little bit more straighter. As when I did it all sort of by hand, did it all, most of it by hand. Didn't actually have a ruler itself, and I don't know.
"I swear, you know you can trust me." "I'm sorry, but I can't take that risk." He turned back to face her now that the worst had been said, and everything else would only emphasize the point. "Have you ever been tortured? People say things they'd never believe they would." Looking at her, he could read exactly what she'd do. She was so frightened and confused, she'd say anything they wanted to hear at the first sign of a threat, if only it would save her. She wouldn't want to. She'd never forgive herself afterward. But her resolve would just completely collapse as soon as they started to question her. "But I don't even know where this is," she countered, trying to convince herself that after all the things she'd already had to go through in her short and miserable life, torture couldn't be that much worse. But knowing deep down, of course, that it would be. "We could be anywhere." "You know it's underground. You know the color of these stones. That would be enough for a smart man." "What are you saying?" Evie shouted, close to losing all control. "That I have to stay here forever?" "Only until I'm done," V replied, trying to calm her down again. "After the 5th, I no longer think it will matter." "The 5th?" she said, puzzled for a moment, until she realized what he was talking about. "You mean a year from now? I have to stay here for a year?" "I'm sorry, Evie," he told her, suddenly seeming deflated in the face of her angry rejection. "I just didn't know what else to do." "You You should have left me alone, she yelled, losing it at last, yet knowing even as she screamed at him that she didn't really mean it, knowing he had no other choice. Why didn't you just leave me alone? Then, with tears blurring her vision and streaming down her face, Evie spun around and dashed from the room, back along the passage to the bedroom, which it seemed she was now going to have to think of as home, because it was either that or think of it as a prison, and she had no other home to go to now, or perhaps forevermore. And V, surrounded by all the treasures of the past, all those things that made a solitary life worthwhile, could only stand and listen as the stillness of the night was rent by painful, uncomprehending sobs, and know that Evie Hammond's wasn't the only life that had changed forever. Windowless as the shadow gallery was, the only indication of the coming morning was that the lights had been turned up a little more brightly, and the smell of frying.
And again, guys, please leave your messages on this live stream itself because it does interrupt the playlist. But thank you very much for those messages.
Still, no matter how much pain or grief the heart and mind might bear, the stomach always has demands quite independent of its own, and Evie had always been prepared to get up for fried eggs. In the Shadow Gallery's kitchen, V was smiling to himself beneath the mask, preparing what the Americans had called eggs in a basket, though in the part of England where he'd come from, they were always called an Egyptian fish-eye sandwich. Quite why, he never knew, but he treasured the picturesque name as another fine survival from the past. Evie found him standing at the stove, the eggs starting to sizzle in the middle of the toasted bread before him, masked and dressed pretty much as usual, except for the cloak, and an apron tied around his waist, which she found at once both ridiculous and touchingly homely. A mother and a father figure, both combined. V, she asked tentatively, not really certain how his mood would be after their contretemps the night before. Oh, good morning, he said pleasantly enough, turning round and holding the pan and spatula away from the stove a moment while he talked. I just wanted to apologize for my reaction last night, Evie said nervously, trying not to stumble over the speech she'd been rehearsing every time she'd woken up in the latter part of the night. I understand what you did for me, and I want you to know that I'm grateful. And then the words just tailed off and refused to say themselves any more as she looked, appalled, at his hands. For V, too busy with his cooking, had elected to put on his gloves. The skin of both hands was horribly scarred, as if from severe burn damage, and that not treated very well besides. What was left of the flesh was healed over now, but the resemblance to normal skin was marginal at best. Your hands? Evie questioned softly, but there didn't seem to be anything else to add. Oh, yes, said V, quickly putting down the pan and grabbing his gloves from the kitchen counter nearby, turning away from her and hiding his hands as he pulled them on. There, he said a moment later, turning back toward her. That's better. I hope I didn't spoil your appetite. No, please, Evie put in quickly, suddenly filled with a sympathy that the previous day she'd never have thought to feel for this strange and baffling man, whose unrevealing reserve disguised almost as much as his mask. It's just... Are you all right? It's fine, he told her briefly, but by no means abruptly. Fine. Can I ask what happened? He turned his attention back to the eggs. There was a fire. V raised his head as if looking off into the distant past. A long time ago.
I realise what I've done here. I've got the line not straight, but I'm not doing too badly, I don't think, guys. Have a quick look at that one while I take a sip of my coffee. Let everything dry for a second.
Yes, thank you, she said eagerly, as if she thought he'd never ask. I'm starving, actually. With that, he nodded toward a small breakfast table and skillfully slipped
give you a quick zoom in.
Picked up a knife and fork and turned to set the simple feast before him. Please, enjoy, he said, adding, after the slightest of pauses, I've already eaten. Of course.
2 seconds, guys. I just got to flip
To eat
over
in her
something.
company would require taking off the mask, and there might be more than simple reasons of identification for avoiding that.
Okay,
And if
now I
his
can hold it
face was
steady for
anything
you.
like his hands, did she really want to know what he looked like? But then the eggs were hot in her mouth, and there was something else to think about apart from other people's features.
As I was saying, guys, there's
Delicious.
Big Ben, which I'll finish off in a second.
Mouth full and already forking up some more,
And
he remarked,
Houses
with
of
all
Parliament,
satisfaction of a chef who just served up.
all my representation of them.
Oh, God.
And then you're the main character, which you're hearing in the background.
Recognition dawning of a long-forgotten taste and bringing back a flood of memories. I haven't had real butter since I was a little girl. Where on earth did you get it from? A government supply train. V's voice betrayed the smirk that obviously played about.
And I'll finish off doing
It
the
was on
sign.
its way to Chancellor Sattler. You stole it from Chancellor Sattler. Evie spluttered, almost choking on a bit of egg. Was there anything you wouldn't risk? You're insane. I dare do all that may
But as
become
you
of man.
probably have noticed, that does give you a little bit more of a pop in the colour, and the shapes actually stand out a lot more than they do in the sort of basic pencil shape that I was doing. The shading I can leave there, and I can then go on to the other kind of shading which I'll do with the colouring. I think I'm going to use pencils on this one, as when I do V in a moment, use it all in black with only just a white mask. So to try and do that in pen would be ambitious, because the pen that I have are crap, and it would just be all one black mess, and I don't want to do that to this one. Because black is the darkest shade you can have, and black is very hard to sort of give a shape to, because it's just a dark void. So I will be using black pencil and sort of shading appropriately.
She took a mouthful of tea.
I mean, if I had a decent Copic marker, I could use like a dark grey and things like that. But I do not, and I was going to go and get myself out today, but it is absolutely persistently pissing down, and I probably do not wish to go and get myself,
she said at length, although she wasn't really sure she wanted to go back.
So I'm staying in and using what I have available, which is going to be pencil. I may not colour it in. I may take a picture of it first, then colour it in. I may not colour it in at all. It all depends what I feel like in a moment once I finish the sign here, and sort of maybe put a few more details here and there.
Aphorisms and quotations. They seemed to make up half his conversation, Evie thought. Maybe even more. Sometimes she was impressed, though probably not as impressed as he thought she ought to be. At other times she just found it downright annoying. Was he really just a know-all with a photographic memory? Or was his manner of speaking just another mask to hide his real self? Or was he, as had occurred to her on the first night they'd met, actually some sort of lunatic? Well, the only way to find out about that real self would be to keep him talking and to listen to the bits that weren't just learned recitation. I think you can be pretty certain if anyone does show up to join in, she said a moment later, Creedy will black bag every one of them. People should not be afraid of their government, he said, slipping back into his teaching mode. Governments should be afraid of their people. And you're going to make that happen by blowing up a building? She asked, rising to the challenge now. The building is a symbol, said the man whose face was nothing more than that besides, as is the act of destroying it. Symbols are given power by people. Alone, a symbol is meaningless, but with enough people involved as well, blowing up a building can change the world. I wish I believed that was possible. Evie put down the empty teacup. I really do. But every time I've seen this world change, it's always been for the worse. She stood up then, adding, thanks for the eggs. And with that she walked away and headed back to her room, leaving V still sitting there at the table, the expression on his mask as enigmatic as ever. Right there. What's he thinking? Asked Chief Inspector Finch, more to himself than Dominic, even though the younger man sat there right beside him. Both of them were staring intently at a small monitor showing security camera footage from the Jordan Tower fiasco of the previous day, from one of the few cameras that the terrorist had somehow neglected to disable on his way in. Looking with total concentration at V, standing contemplatively over the unconscious bodies of Evie and Dominic sprawling at his feet. Is he considering leaving her? After she just saved him? He's a terrorist. You can't expect him to act like you or me, Dominic said shortly, still red-eyed and raising a hand to feel the bruising at the back of his neck. Understanding the man wasn't his major priority at the moment, just catching him and getting him alone in a cell where he could kick 9 kinds of living shit out of the bastard. And as for the girl, well, Dominic wasn't the kind who'd normally go around beating up women, but for women with pepper sprays, he was prepared to make an exception. On the monitor, V finally bent down and scooped Evie up in his arms. Some part of him is human, Fitch pointed out. And for better or worse, she's stuck with him. Watching V carry Evie to the elevator one more time, and he couldn't remember how many times he'd watched the masked man do the same before, Finch finally turned the monitor off and swiveled his chair round to face Dominic, noticing the folder his assistant had brought when he'd come over to join him. You got anything else on her parents? Yeah, Dominic spread papers on the desk. And it's not good. They were both interned at Belmarsh. Oh, no, groaned Finch. The same old story again. How many thousands had disappeared? Good people, for the most part, he was sure, just because they disagreed with the party policy line, or protested at the takeover. How many families had been broken up while they were establishing the new order? Still, they'd been worse places than Belmarsh, he knew. Belmarsh was just where they took the politicals. There'd been other, fouler hells during the Reclamation, for the degenerates, the immigrants, the heretics, and all the other labels they'd used to dehumanize the victims. How easy it was to forget that one was dealing with real people when they just became categories, to be sorted, filed, and then forgotten when they'd been removed from the records. It was still going on to this day. After all, nobody in the media or the government news releases spoke of this V as a man, as someone who might have feelings, a family, a history. He was just the terrorist. Of course, of all the categories who'd been dealt with in the Reclamation, it had been the politicals who'd been the most troublesome, who'd put up the most resistance. Yeah, Dominic continued, a little more sympathy in his voice now that the subject had changed away from his particular bête noire and back to Evie's parents. She died during the hunger strike and he copped it when the military retook the shed. That's terrible. That's not the worst of it. Her brother was at St. Mary's. Christ. Nothing but bad luck there, the younger man concluded, with a shrug that implied, but what could anyone do? So, we know her story. Now we need his. 7. To say that Louis Prothero had an apartment worthy of a man in his position would be something of an understatement. The penthouse overlooking the Thames was more of a monument to a man in his position. Or, more to the point, a cathedral raised entirely in celebration of its owner. Louis Prothero is God, it said. There is no other God but he. And this is where Louis Prothero retires at night for worship of himself. The large and lavish bathroom reflected this no less than any of the other rooms. Indeed, right then it reflected nothing but Louis Prothero, for his face and robed figure were to be seen looking back from gleaming mirrors all around the room. And where there were no mirrors, monitors projected from the walls instead, each screen wired back to a central video unit that was repeating the evening's earlier Voice of London broadcast on a continuous loop. Somehow then, the bathroom became a vast kaleidoscope, combining past and present, audio and visual. A myriad starry aspects of the divine Louis Prothero, too wonderful for simple words ever to quite express. What more could a man wish to contemplate, stripped naked and leaving behind all the dross of the everyday world, than himself, the star and marvel of his age? And what better voice to provide accompaniment to his own than, again, his own? "I'll tell you what I know," the Prothero of the Monitor was shouting to the London mob, and Prothero of the bathroom joined in. "I know this is not a man." The broadcast was, naturally, about that stupid terrorist who'd almost managed to blow up the studio, almost taken the great Louis Prothero off the air. A mask-wearing clown, he thought. That's all he was. "A man does not wear a mask," cried Television Prothero, as his living counterpart flipped open a mirrored cabinet to reveal row upon row of prescription medicine bottles, for none of which he had any legal prescription at all. "What is he?" cried Prothero, sorting out his drug list for the evening. "A man does not threaten innocent civilians," the tape continued. "What is he?" Prothero threw back the feed line again, now with better timing. "I'll tell you what he is," the Monitor responded with precision. "What every gutless, freedom-hating terrorist is, a goddamned coward." Strange how they always wrote that line for him to say, he thought, even when he was talking about suicide bombers, who dared far more than even he, the heroic Louis Prothero, would do. After all, he might say whatever was necessary in defense of what he believed in, but to actually die for it? No, thank you very much. He was officer class, and they had cannon fodder for that sort of thing. Still, calling other people cowards had never affected his ratings, and those were far more important than anything else. As the audience broke out into spontaneous applause, just as they always did, Prothero paused to gobble a handful of pills, chasing down the cocktail with half a tumbler of scotch. Ah, yes, that should do it. Before he could take another swig, the phone began to ring. Using the remote to pause the tape, Prothero picked up the handset and listened for a moment. That prancing, self-important little piece of shit, Roger Dascombe. Just because Dascombe attended cabinet meetings, and that was unjust in itself, it was quite obvious that Prothero himself was the only person fit to talk to Sutler on behalf of the mouth. No, actually he should be telling Sutler what to do, not receiving instructions from on high. And just because he dressed up like a nonce, and what was this drivel he was talking about now? Oh, that again. "There will be no negotiation, Roger," he said flatly, disregarding that Dascombe was nominally his boss. "When I come in tomorrow, the paddy will be gone. I'm looking at the tape right now, and he has no idea how to light me. My nose looks like Big fucking Ben."
Bing! Bong.
Dascombe began to whine, but Prothero was no longer listening, instead carefully checking his nose in the mirror against the one on the monitor. Definitely the thick Irishman's fault. "Listen to me, you bleeding sod," Prothero cut in. "England prevails because I say it does, and every lazy sod on this show is there because I say he is, and that includes you. Find another director of photography or find yourself another job." That told him, Prothero thought, clicking off the phone. Then, picking up the remote and setting the Voice of London rolling again, he headed for the shower. Dascombe. The terrorists. Everybody. Fuck them all. "I'll tell you what I wish," the taped voice came again, more brash, more bully boyish by the moment, as Prothero turned on the faucet. "I wish I'd been there. I wish I'd had the chance for a face-to-face. Just one chance, that's all I need." And as the shower began to stream, down in the lobby, the elevator doors opened with a faint mechanical ding, while a black-gloved hand swiped an ID through the security panel. An ID with a familiar name and face, though not the one belonging to the hand. E.V. Hammond's. Prothero, of course, knew none of this, sluicing down his well-rounded form in the enormous shower, while watching none other than himself upon a waterproof monitor, placed there specially for the purpose. "This so-called V," his voice re-echoed, "along with his accomplice, E.V. Hammond, neo-demagogues spouting their message of hate." Nice delivery, that, he thought, as clouds of thick steam rose around him, coagulating like ectoplasm. But Prothero was wrapped up in far more than that by now. He was wrapped up in himself. "A delusional and aberrant voice," said his television self. "Aberrant and abhorrent," he chimed in, embroidering on the theme. Ought to be writing his own scripts, obviously, as well as doing everything else. "Delivering a terrorist's ultimatum." "Treason!" cried Prothero, taking the audience's part, responding to himself. "An ultimatum that was met with swift, surgically precise justice. No mercy. And the moral of this story, ladies and gentlemen?" his electronic persona asked, dropping now into a calm, reassuring voice that sought to put all the troubles of the past few days behind them. Prothero, smiling and winking to his own reflection as he stepped out of the shower, didn't wait for the recording, but delivered the punchline on his own. "Good guys win, bad guys lose, and as always, England prevails." And as the tape re-echoed that triumphant declaration, he clicked off the monitors, watching that much-loved image of himself fade to grey, and saw another face reflected in their glass, and in the mirrors. A bone-white smile, a fixed, mustachioed grin, hideous in its implication. A mask, partly shaded beneath a broad-brim hat, mounted on black-caped shoulders, a combination of the Puritan and the Joker, an image of the grinning knight, a 17th century incarnation of the Grim Reaper come back to haunt the 21st. V. "Holy Christ!" cried Prothero.
Just going to get my phone charger a second, guys, so bear with me. Again, you can leave a comment, but feel free to keep watching and listen to the playlist in the background. Again, it's an absolutely amazing story, and I'm not talking too much for it, but I just want everybody to hear it and listen myself, really. It's helping me concentrate. I will be finishing off this sign in a moment and putting a few more details here and there.
Terrified of his uninvited, most unwelcome guest. "Good evening, Commander Prothero," said V calmly, though rather less than pleasantly, looking down at him as if he were some pinned and wriggling insect awaiting examination or dissection. "Oh my God!" groaned Prothero, suddenly and desperately hoping that there might be another deity beside himself. "How did you get in here?" Disdaining to reply, V seemed to be giving him a moment to recover from his panic before commencing with the evening's entertainment. And Prothero, still looking to retain some scrap of dignity despite his terror, took advantage of the pause to scramble away and grab a bath towel. The phone on which he'd been speaking to Dascombe earlier, however, seemed too far away to reach. "Don't worry," V told him, following the direction of his glance. "I've made sure our reunion won't be disturbed by any annoying late-night phone calls, Commander." "Stop that!"
Okay, now I'm back.
Prothero, annoyance mingling with his confusion, and something a little more than annoyance. "Why do you keep calling me that?" "That was your title, remember?" V stepped closer, looming over him like the shadow of impending death. "When we first met, all those years ago." Cooling droplets of shower water now began to mingle on Prothero's quaking flesh with even colder sweat. "You wore a uniform in those days," said V, a sudden hardness edging his voice. "You looked very good in it." And then the images began to come back. Not video footage this time. No one saw any footage from those days anymore, but memories emerging from their long-suppressed hiding place in Prothero's dank and rank unconscious. Lark Hill Resettlement Camp, latest in a long line of venerable institutions. After all, the very concept of the concentration camp was a British invention, dating back to the Boer War, picked up by others with enthusiasm. Auschwitz, Dachau, the Gulags, Guantanamo Bay, Lark Hill. Not that anyone called them concentration camps after the Second World War, of course. They were detention centers or resettlement camps. Different names. Same nasty institutions. The razor wire fences, the watchtowers and searchlights, the brutes in boots with the soulless faces and the automatic weapons, the doctors with the scalpels not bothering with anesthetics. The wire cages, where the naked prisoners huddled together, regardless of their sex or age, Don't call them human beings. Don't even bother with their names. The numbers forcibly tattooed upon their skins were surely quite enough. Unwashed and wallowing in their own filth, and praying to their varied gods. Not the God, for, as everybody knew, the true God was an Englishman and had no time for Johnny Foreigner. The punishment beatings, the sexual abuse and humiliations, the photographs to laugh over in the officers' mess afterward, the torture rooms, the executions, the cremation ovens. And, yes, the human skin lampshades that one of the guards had made. A joke, he said, to keep up the old traditions. Besides, anything Herman the German could do, be sure that Tommy Atkins could do far better. Of course, the man had been disciplined for that, but all that meant was transfer to another camp, where he probably did the same sort of thing all over again. Being a psychopathic sadist wasn't the problem. Quite the reverse. As they always used to joke in the mess, with the jobs they did, camp guards needed to be more than a touch pathological to stay sane. It was just that this one had got a mite frolicsome. And there, bestriding his world like a colossus, his little hell on earth and kingdom of his own, Commander Louis Prothero. So fine in his perfectly tailored uniform, and tailored then to fit a rather leaner and more muscular body, the sort the ladies liked, or so he told himself, but perhaps it was just the power. His mirror-polished boots, his horsewhip, his first delusions of grandeur, delusory in that his notions of his own grandeur had simply been far too humiliatingly modest, before he rose to the godhead that only television could bestow. Strolling along the blood-stained and ceramic tiled floors in that special block, the one that only the top brass were shown, but only after the floors had been sluiced clean so he didn't soil his boots. The cells where the experiments were, or at least the ones who'd survived the ordinary horrors of the medical block. The experiments. One particular experiment. "You?" gasped Prothero, terror almost freezing the word upon his lips. A final image, then, from when it had all come to an end, a faceless silhouette against a howling inferno of flame, stalking his nightmares to a soundtrack of explosions and screaming men, the heart of the darkness that had haunted him ever since. The horror. The horror. "It is you," said Prothero flatly, finally, knowing there was nothing more to be done and nothing more to say. Not wet ceramic tiles beneath him now, but marble. Not blood-stained. Yet. "The ghost of Christmas past," said the voice behind the mask. And then the figure stepped forward, became silhouetted against the bathroom lights, became as black as death itself. Across town in Lambeth, south of the Thames, a phone began to ring in a night-darkened apartment. Nothing here of the overblown grandeur of Prothero's place. This was a small studio flat suited to a man living alone, a man who'd lost his family long ago and whose existence, as a consequence, was little more now than work. With his salary, the occupant could have afforded something better, but all he really needed was a place to sleep that was close enough, when the fuel shortages got bad, for him to leave the car behind and walk to work. Or at least a place to sleep when he was allowed to. Some time passed before the figure in the bedroom stirred, fumbling in the dark and cursing under his breath, then finally flicked on the light and reached out for the handset. "Yeah," said Eric Finch, barely awake, eyes half open, completely unaware of the time, but knowing that this was not the time for routine calls. "Finch!" a panic-stricken voice bleated in his ear. "It's Dascom!" "Dascom?" queried Finch, uncomprehendingly. Why was that slimy little prat phoning him in the middle of the night? "What? I've already called the Chancellor," Dascom cut in hurriedly, almost tripping over himself in his desperate urgency to get the words out.
Right, I'm going to get a picture of Big Ben in a second, guys, so I can get that nice and looking good.
He had no idea
Bear
what
with me.
Dascom was talking about. And more than that, he'd never heard
And while I do,
such a
why don't you have a good old peruse of this one?
Asleep from his eyes with a knuckle, he asked, "What situation?"
Tell me what you think. Do you like the way I've
Half an hour later,
changed
still waiting
the
for forensics
graphic
to arrive,
on the
Finch
spelling there,
and
and
Dascom stood
obviously
side by side
the
in Prothero's bathroom, looking down at the
Houses
former
of Parliament
star's
still need a little bit of something to it, but I think the colour will sort of take that
no longer pumping against
to in its arms and
sank down toward the floor.
make it a little bit
His
better.
was a two-tone corpse, white above and pink beneath. No knife wound on this corpse to let the blood escape. No messy human meat exposed to view. A clean death, as far as murders ever went. By the body sat a single floribunda rose, petals open in full bloom, salmon pink, but blending into cream and yellow. And looking round the gilded palace of sin that was Louis Prothero's bathroom, Finch was sure as hell that the man who'd been the voice of London wasn't the type to put it there. Jesus Christ. What sort of life was the man living anyway? The bathroom was bad enough, but the other rooms... Chancellor Sattler agreed for obvious reasons, Daskam cut across his train of thought, that we have to keep this discreet, Inspector. Cast in the wrong light, the loss of the voice of London could be devastating to our credibility. You understand? Finch understood all right. No thought of the man who was dead, of the man who'd killed him, or of bringing the murderer to justice. Bloody media people. Let's just cover our asses and get out of this mess with our jobs and pay packets and status still.
Oh, I made Big Ben completely
looking
wrong.
good and smelling of roses, like the one here on the floor.
Oh, a few buildings need a bit more detail as well.
Roses. This one obviously had some significance, though right now Finch had no idea what. He knelt down to look at it more closely. Not a familiar colour. But then flowers weren't his forte anyway. He'd need to find someone who could tell him more about it. Perhaps a stroke, Daskam continued, merely thinking aloud now, as he realized that Finch wasn't going to give him any audience feedback. No, too horrific. A quiet, dignified death in his sleep. Not that there was anything dignified about being poisoned, Finch thought, glancing back at the green foam that had bubbled from Prothero's nose and mouth, at the empty eyes staring fixedly at the ceiling. No mirrors up there, Finch thought. But then Prothero obviously never thought he'd end up lying on his back, with poison eating into his nerves and brain, unable to see himself in the last few seconds before he was unable to see anything at all. With that green gunk coming out of his nostrils, he probably wouldn't have wanted to see himself anyway. Footsteps clicking on the marble floor attracted Finch's attention.
Okay, so we've got a decent picture of Big Ben now, so let's use that picture as a reference. So let's take you back over here. Make sure you're looking okay.
But young in the service as he was, he'd quickly become used to seeing a large variety of corpses, especially in days like these. Got any eyes or ears on this one? Finch asked him, rising once again to his feet. Camcos were cut, Dominic replied. Same MO as before, but we've got an elevator log ID. Let me guess, Finch remarked wearily, already knowing the answer as well as his assistant. She's in deep, Inspector, Dominic confirmed. 8. Terror. Well, the old terror, the one she tried to suppress, the one she hated to think about and mostly didn't dare, the one where she woke shortly before dawn and heard. Was she back there now? Was the old terror repeating itself? Or was this a new one? Whatever it was, Evie woke to the sound of a violent struggle, as she'd done so long ago. And that wasn't the only terrifying part. The pre-dawn violence was bad enough, but it was always, she knew, the precursor to a chain of events that grew more terrible still. But surely that couldn't be happening here. Not again. Not here in V's underground home. Not unless someone had discovered the location of the Shadow Gallery. V? She called quietly, hardly daring to shout in case it gave her position away. The noise continued. But then she realized there'd been nothing like the barking report of gunfire. Only the clash of metal, the sound of stamping feet and shouting. Slightly reassured, but still nervous, Evie tumbled out of bed, hastily pulled on a robe, and then silently and cautiously made her way along the passage to the Shadow Gallery's poster-littered living area. Creeping into a gloomy corner of the hall, she looked, and felt her jaw drop in astonishment. For there was V, his cloak thrown back over his shoulders, wielding a rapier in one hand, leaping and stamping as if in a deadly duel, cutting, parrying, and lunging toward a hopelessly overmatched opponent. a stationary suit of armor. Had he gone completely mad? The previous day she'd thought him dangerous, but that sort of threat receded into nothingness compared with this completely uncontrolled behavior. But then she realized that, actually, he wasn't entirely alone, or at least not entirely unaccompanied. On a television set behind him, an old black and white movie was playing, a swashbuckler that looked as if it went back to the 1930s, with a dashing hero also fencing for his life and more besides, for love. And V was mimicking all the hero's moves in perfect synchronization and speaking his lines as well, words he quite obviously knew by heart. With a last flurry of clicking metallic blows, he finally vanquished the helpless suit of armor and sent its helmet crashing to the floor. Evie could only smile to herself at the complete and absolute commitment of his lunacy. As the echoes of the tumbled helmet eventually faded into silence, he realized he was being watched. "Oh," said V quietly, quickly adjusting his mask, though whether that was to make sure his identity or his embarrassment was covered, she couldn't tell. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No," she told him, though that wasn't quite the truth. "I just thought you were fighting. Fighting for real." Whether there was concern in her words for him, for herself, or for the both of them, was something neither of them could quite decide. Leaving the question hanging, V turned and gestured toward the TV set, using the rapier to do so. "It's my favorite
Rapier's
film,
a sword,
The
guys.
Count of Monte Cristo, with Robert Donat as Edmond Dantes. It gets me every time." "I've never seen it." After all, it must have been made at least 50 years before Evie was even born, and now that there were far fewer TV channels than when she was a little girl, it wasn't surprising she hadn't come across it. "Really?" asked V. Then, with a rather charming eagerness, "Would you like to?" "Does it have a happy ending?" she asked tentatively, feeling somehow that, after all she'd been through in the last few days, happy endings were now the most important things in the world. "The Count finally finds peace in the arms of the beautiful Mercedes," he assured her. "A happy ending?" she asked again, still not quite certain what finding peace might imply. "As only celluloid can deliver." "Okay," she said, smiling with just a little relief. Then, looking at what he still held in his hand and remembering how carried away he'd been a few moments before, she added, "But put the sword away." Finch had returned to his desk at New Scotland Yard and begun to drain a steady succession of coffee cups. He ought to be used to losing sleep after all these years on the force, but on balance, the older he got, the harder it got to take. And in spite of the continuing law and order clampdown by Creedy and his goons, the sort of crime that ordinary coppers had to deal with didn't seem to be going down at all. The more you took away the things that were important in people's lives, he guessed, such as liberty and freedom of movement, the more desperate they became. And desperate people didn't worry about what was right or wrong, only what they could get away with. He looked up then from the computer monitor where facts and figures were blurring into meaningless symbols before his aching eyes as Dominic came into the office flicking through a sheaf of printouts. "Forensics just wrapped things up," the young detective told him. "No prints, no hair, no fibers. The guy's like a ghost. But you wouldn't believe the shit they found in Prothero. Drugs. Could have started his own hospital." "Interesting." Finch beckoned him over. "Why?" asked Dominic, coming round to join him behind the desk. Finch indicated the monitor, where the meaningless symbols he'd been looking at a moment earlier now began to make a little more sense. "Did you know that Louis Prothero was one of the richest men in the country before he became the voice of London?" "Drugs?" Dominic's eyes lit up, as they always did when there was even the slightest hint of a hot lead. "Legal ones," Finch said. "A major stockholder in Viadox Pharmaceutical." "Wow," breathed Dominic as the link snapped into place. "Viadox and St. Mary's in less than a week. Coincidence?" Finch shook his head, the faintest of smiles upon his face. His usual reaction to a hot
Okay, the
lead.
clock's done. I'm not going to.
When you've been at this as
I'm
long
going
as
to have
I
to, aren't
have,
I?
you stop
I
believing.
don't think it has any. We're not easily seen.
In the
Numbers
black
I'm
and
talking
white
about.
world of the TV screen, which had somehow had all the colour of magic to Evie for a couple of hours, the final romantic swell of music was coming up, with Edmond Dantes, the Count of Monte Cristo himself, nestled in the tree of
that dry a
happiness,
second,
the
that's not,
Mercedes de Rosas. Find your own tree, he addressed the final remark to the viewer, and as the end came up, Evie could only sniff. They certainly didn't make them like that anymore, and she didn't care if that was a cliché. Did you like it? Asked Fee, looking round to the remote. Yeah. To simply sit in safety on a comfortable couch and watch a movie after the last few days that she'd been having was a pleasure in itself. But it made me feel sorry for Mercedes. Why? Because he cared more about revenge than he did about her. Vee nodded, as if this was an acceptable female point of view, but not one that carried a great deal of weight with him, and clicked off the DVD player. BTN's regular news programming reappeared on the screen. And June, far more serious than usual, though it had to be admitted that in the last few days serious-faced newsreaders were becoming more and more the norm, was making yet another great announcement.
Okay.
Fans nationwide have been devastated as news of the most popular... Vee started to reach out to turn off the set, but Evie put a hand on his arm. Wait, what's this? Most awarded stars in the history of the BTN, continued the familiar face and voice. A man known to the entire nation as the Voice of London passed away late last night from apparent heart failure. A black bordered photo of Louis Prothero appeared next on the screen. She's lying, Evie said flatly, her conviction absolute. How do you know? Asked Vee, though obviously he knew well enough that she was. She always blinks a lot when she does a story that she knows is false, Evie told him softly, still trying to concentrate on the words of the announcement. An extraordinary talent, he had dedicated his life to his country and his beliefs, working tirelessly at his profession. It came as no surprise to those who knew him that his body was found at his office, where he often worked long hours after everyone else had gone home. And Louis, you will be sorely missed. Evie could feel her hackles rising as Vee reached out to turn off the television. Something about all this just didn't seem right. So many things had happened in the last few days, and she couldn't quite put her finger on how they connected up. Except that she began to suspect they all linked back to Vee. And then she became aware that he was silently watching her, the mask's expression as unreadable as ever. Vee, she began hesitantly, hardly wanting to bring up the subject, as she didn't know where it would lead. Yesterday, I couldn't find my ID. Still he sat there, regarding her in enigmatic silence. You didn't take it, did you? She asked nervously, dreading the answer as soon as she asked the question. She found she couldn't quite sit still, and the couch that had seemed so comfortable a few minutes before was starting to feel more like a bed of nails. Would you prefer a lie or the truth? He asked her in a neutral voice, suggestive of nothing but making the answer absolutely clear. Oh my God, gasped Evie, jumping up from the couch and staring down at him in shocked disbelief. Did you have anything to do with that? A gesture toward the TV set made it quite plain what the that she was referring to was. Yes, he told her calmly. I killed him. You... Evie didn't believe she was hearing this, yet at the same time she knew she had to believe she was. Oh, God! You're upset. Vee quite plainly stated the obvious. One of those facile pieces of phrasing that suggested he thought that acknowledging she was upset might somehow calm her down. Unfortunately, it had quite the opposite effect. I'm upset, she cried, trying to fight down a growing sense of near hysterical panic. You just said you killed Louis Prothero! Louis Prothero! I might have killed the fingerman that attacked you, too. He inclined his head in what she'd come to recognize as a gesture of inquiry. Usually uncomfortable inquiry. But did I hear any objection then? What? She almost choked on the word, suddenly taken aback. Why was he suddenly changing the subject? Or was he changing the subject? Violence can be used for a higher purpose. Here it came again. that sense of being tutored in unpleasant truths. She took a couple of paces backward, suddenly nervous. What are you talking about? Justice. Oh. Evie paused as she thought of the movie they'd just watched, of the injustice done to Edmond Dantes, of the illegal imprisonment of the Chateau d'If, and although she had no liking for the principle of revenge, of the admittedly justified payback his enemies had finally received, and how, in the end, yes, she had thought there was a happy ending. I see, she breathed softly, understanding but still wishing to sound non-committal. At times, V's view of the world was just too raw and uncompromising, too hard for her to take. There is no court in this country for men like Prothero, V told her, though he didn't actually tell her what the crime had been that merited such final and fatal retribution. Are you going to... A pause, a deep breath, a question she didn't really want to ask. Kill more people? Ready to answer, but he nodded anyway. Are you going to kill me? The question just slipped out. Of course not, Evie. He rose to his feet and started toward her, almost as if he wanted to take her in his arms and reassure her. But then, of course, he would say that, whether he intended to or not. No, don't, she said, backing off a pace to match the one he'd taken toward her. Then, turning away in a gesture that effectively ended the conversation, she said, I think I should go back to my room now. Finch, meanwhile, hadn't left his room at all, hadn't left his desk, hadn't left that same screen where he was dredging through the Nose's data retrieval system. Take a look at this, he said, summoning Dominic, who'd been doing much the same. Prothero's military record. What do you see? Dominic leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Iraq, Kurdistan, Syria before and after, Sudan. Busy boy. Yeah, Finch swigged coffee. But after all that, they put him in charge of a detention facility at Larkhill. No good deed goes unpunished, put in Dominic contemplatively. Right, agreed Finch, though he silently added to himself, or bad deed unrewarded. Though he found it hard to think what the reward might have been in a place like Larkhill. Maybe Dominic was right. Maybe it was some misdemeanor that had got Prothero sent there. But that wasn't what his instincts said. So maybe Larkhill had been more important than it first appeared. Do you think there's a connection between Larkhill and our boy? Asked Dominic, after a few seconds' thought. It might explain the connection between him and the Hammond girl, Finch replied, though he recalled that the girl's parents had been sent to Belmarsh rather than Larkhill. Still, detention camps were detention camps, and maybe it wasn't the camps that were the connection. It was Viadox who'd come up with a cure for the St. Mary's virus, and Prothero was a major shareholder in Viadox, and in charge of Larkhill. And V had killed Prothero. No, it all went round in circles, somehow, and didn't quite add up. But the name Larkhill was eating into his gut now, and he knew he was going to have to find out more. Such a pleasant-sounding name, redolent of birdsong and woodland and rolling English countryside. But then people probably used to think that Belsen was a nice place name, before they built a concentration camp there. Larkhill. Problem is, he added, I can't find any other record of the place. They looked at each other for a few seconds, but, as Finch had suspected all along, Dominic didn't surprise him with a brilliant idea. Instead, the expression on his face just said, what do we do next? Sometimes the boy was such a disappointment, thought Finch ruefully, smiling slightly to himself. But no, that wasn't really true. He had no more right to expect Dominic to suddenly solve things for him than he did the Almighty. And in the last 40 years, the Almighty hadn't come through once. Yet. It was just that, unfortunately, Finch knew exactly what they had to do next, and he was absolutely sure it was going to be absolutely futile. But they had to go through the procedures anyway. Sighing, he got slowly to his feet and started toward the door, gesturing for the young man to follow. At least the journey he had in mind probably wouldn't take long enough to give Dominic time to kill them. A couple of hours later, Finch's frustration was starting to approach boiling point. He'd had quite enough of dead ends and stonewalling, as he'd also had enough of traipsing along what seemed to be endless miles of corridor on his redirected way from one filing clerk to another. And now here he was, sitting in an office of the Department of Military Records in the Ministry of Defense, the office of, he'd been told, the man who'd been there, the man in charge, who'd be just a blighter to sort out the problem for him. Fat fucking chance. Major Wilson had some of that same military pomposity that the unlamented Louis Prothero had had, though he still had the form and style to carry it off convincingly. An officer and a gentleman. Sitting there behind his desk with his back ramrod straight, and probably all the straighter in response to Finch's battered, weary slouch, he obviously had no time for civilian interference. Damnation! If this was what a career policeman looked like, he'd show him what it was like to go up against a career military man. Damned nosy bastard anyway. And the boy with him looked as if he could do with 6 months' worth of square bashing to knock him into shape. Young puppy had actually had the damn nerve to ask him a direct question a couple of minutes ago. Shouldn't be allowed. Larkhill? Wilson queried, military bluster mingling with an apparent desire to help as Finch brought up the name yet again. Larkhill? I don't recall that particular facility, Inspector, but of course you're welcome to review our records. We've been through your records, Major, Finch said through gritted teeth, struggling with no great success to maintain a dignified calm. All they say is that there was a detention facility at Larkhill approximately 10 miles north of Salisbury. Well then, there you have it, Wilson said smugly. That'd show these civilian Johnnies. Military records, absolutely reliable. At New Scotland Yard, they probably couldn't tell the difference between a criminal record and a laundry list, if they could find either. Finch sighed and rubbed his forehead wearily, looking up at Wilson's completely false but oh so helpful, oh so descending smile. And the bastard hadn't even offered them a cup of coffee. This is a matter of some urgency, Major Wilson, he said with exaggerated patience, determined that he wasn't going to fall into that old English routine where if someone didn't seem to understand what you were saying, you simply repeated it louder and louder until you did. We need
Unfortunately,
to know
we
if there was
do
anything
that.
different about this facility.
Unfortunately.
I'm sorry, Inspector, came the supercilious reply, but I really cannot remember. Was there a specific profile for those being sent there? Finch probed doggedly, exasperatedly. Usual undesirable, I should think. But do you know? Of course not, snapped Wilson, his own patience starting to wear thin. A breath to regain his composure. Couldn't let these damned civilians get under his skin. I wasn't stationed there myself. Do you know who was? Like a dog worrying a bone, Finch wouldn't let it go. I cannot recall any specific names, Wilson stonewalled again, but if you look through our records, your records are either deleted, omitted, or missing, growled Finch, voice rising, patience finally exhausted. As you were the head of the detention program at that time, before you go any further, Inspector, Wilson barked back, face starting to flush with anger. Let me remind you that things were very chaotic back then. Finch groaned inwardly, while Dominic looked on in helpless frustration. How many times had they heard that line already this morning? Right now we don't have the problems we had back then, Wilson continued flatly. We all did what we had to do, and under the circumstances we did the best we could. Then, finally, shortly, and in the act of rising to his feet, and that's all I have to say about that. A couple of paces round the desk, a hand gesturing toward the door, a tight-lipped expression, and silence. That really was all that Wilson had to say. Wearily, frustratedly, Finch shrugged and got to his feet, accompanied by Dominic, saying nothing but giving Wilson a contemptuous glare that all too eloquently said, "Roast in hell, you pompous bastard," and left. An officer and a gentleman. Fuck off and die. 9. You can do this, Evie said to herself, taking a deep breath and looking down at the small piece of paper she had clutched in her hand. The same piece of paper with the address written on it that she'd taken from its place in the frame of her makeup mirror the night that all this had started, the night that had changed her life. Funny how you held on to things like that, even when everything else had descended into complete chaos. Well, if she was going to do it, it was time to make a start. Time to overcome that feeling of nervousness that she knew was only the surface symptom of an underlying dread she'd always felt, a fear of the world and all its parts. But sometimes that fear just had to be overcome, if only for a little while. Getting up off the bed, she left the room that had become hers and returned along the passage to rejoin V. She found him sitting quietly, listening to soft music, masked and inscrutable as ever. "Hello," she said tentatively, not even sure if he was actually awake behind that mask. And if he wasn't, was this the opportunity for one of those Phantom of the Opera moments? The unmasking, the hideous face, the horror? No. When she started to think of the possible consequences, it didn't seem like a good idea at all. And anyway, the nod of greeting he gave her showed he wasn't asleep at all. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, sitting down on the couch and looking toward him like an actress not quite sure of her next line. "I want to ask you something, but I don't think you'll understand why unless you know a few things about me." Another nod from V, and now he sat up straighter, quite obviously giving her his full attention. That at least was encouraging, but still she found herself picking nervously at a thread on the couch. What she wanted to tell him brought back unpleasant memories that she preferred not to think about. The past, her own past particularly, didn't make for idle conversation. "My father was a writer," she continued after a deep breath. After all, he'd been so dear to her, with his unruly hair and glasses, his gangling frame and lopsided smile, that since he'd been gone, it was always painful to even think of him, let alone talk about him. "You would have liked him. He used to say that artists used lies to tell the truth, while politicians used them to cover the truth up." "A man after my own heart," V remarked briefly, softly. "He always told the best stories until—" A pause, another deep breath. "Till my brother died. That was when everything changed. My brother was one of the pupils at St. Mary's." And then the memories really did come back with an overwhelming power. Memories so poignant they almost made her weep now, just as she'd wept so much then, so many years ago. The intensive care unit at the hospital, where she hadn't really understood what was going on, but they'd all had to wear masks over their mouths and noses, and it wasn't the sort of mask you wore to play games in. And Mummy had been crying, and Daddy had been trying not to, as he held her in his arms and did what he could to comfort her.
Okay, guys, I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to do any more detail to it, because I think if I put too much on there, it's going to sort of convolute everything that is there. I might, looking at it again, might put similar lines to here on here, but looking at other pictures of Parliament a moment ago, that actually looks pretty close, damn it, if I can get it, especially with the ink pen I've got and the steady of my hand. It's ready now for just sort of colouring in. So I think that is a good spot to end the stream.
And Timmy had been one of the lucky ones.
So I'll end the playlist there and let you guys sort of soak this in a second, just before I end the stream today. And again, guys, I'll give you a zoom in to what I've done today. Hopefully you have enjoyed today, and you have sort of noticed the little differences that I've put in between the pencil version and the inking version I've done today. Again, I will colour this in. I've only got about half an hour until my son, or about an hour actually saying that, but I want to colour this in like a good amount of time to colour this in. So don't forget, you can join me again tomorrow. My name is Blut084, BLUT084, Art and Games. here every day on YouTube, occasionally on Mixer, and every day and night over on Instagram. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and tune in tomorrow for the coloring and shading. I think I'm going to be using pencils unless I can find myself some really good pens. So maybe some Copic markers and things like that, but we'll find out tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow, guys. Hit that bell so you don't miss out when I've gone live, or if you're catching this back later in the afternoon, guys, and you're watching back, thank you very much for doing that, and thank you very much for making it this far through the video. I'll see you tomorrow, and see you later on for some more games. I may be on Mixer tonight, as I've kind of finished all the games I have on the PlayStation, and that's the games that I play directly to YouTube. But you never know, so don't forget to hit that bell so you never miss out on anything up on my channel. Again, this week and this whole month is fire and fireworks, so I will be continuing on with some more fireworks later on today and throughout the month. Don't forget, I love you all, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much, guys. Bye-bye for now. Oh, mate, you're gonna get fucking soaked. I'll get you a nice warm shower so you can jump straight in it. Fucking soaked by the time you get back. Bibbidi 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 bibbidi. I have to get in a taxi. Of course, I have fucking money on me. Not a penny. I'll have to get a taxi. What? You want more now? Then you want to move. What am I going to do with this one thing? Oh, gotcha. I got ya. Got that spot. Got that spot. Got that spot. Hmm. What you can itch yourself, innit? Hmm? That's what you can itch. Tickle. Tickle, tickle, tickle. Get ya. Get ya. Tickle, tickle. Oh, let's bet you that. We're both going to get wet later. No, no, I don't. That. Don't you stop. You're so bloody skinny. No belly rubs. Get those belly rubs. Get them belly rubs. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Get them shit out of me. Right. 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 Belly rubs. You ain't gonna move for shit, are you? No?